Welcome to Bad First Impression, the podcast about movies and where we meet them. I'm your host, Devin Warner, and every week me and a guest go to a screening and discuss how the theater experience impacted our impression of the movie. Returning to the show for another guest-choiced episode, we have Alex Wolz, who was previously on to discuss Moonrise Kingdom. He's back because one of the films he, at the end of that episode, cited as an example of something he would like to discuss if it were screening somewhere.
Yes.
Was screening somewhere. We're talking, of course, about Blade Runner 2049, the 2017 sequel to the Ridley Scott sci-fi classic. I wanted to kind of remind people, because it's been a little while since that episode, why was this a movie that you felt particularly compelled to return to?
So a couple things with that. First off, I think there's a loophole in your system.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do now,
Sure.
end of this episode, I'm going to pick a movie that's screening next week. And if I just keep doing that, I'll be the only guest on the
You're right.
podcast.
Somebody could theoretically hijack
Have you thought about that?
by just picking, like you could have come in with a knowledge of the repertory schedule for the next week
Just telling you, man.
and said, I'd like to come back. You're correct. Somebody could do that.
I'm not going to, but I
you're not
could. I
going
just
to.
wanted to bring it.
Thank you for
plant the
correctly
seed
pointing
in your
out.
head. Yeah, okay. But to your question, so first off, sci-fi, my favorite genre. So I'm
Sure.
making it a goal of mine to dive deeper into sci-fi that I missed initially or didn't experience properly. Because you know me and experience how you watch a movie, right?
Yeah.
So when I went to see Blade Runner 2049 initially, you said 2017, so I was 16 years old, so I was not old enough. Yeah, come on, man.
I'm really sorry. I don't want to do that to you. It's not, you have no say in it.
But so I went to go with my stepbrother and my older brother. Went to a local cinema. Why are you still laughing, man?
Because it's silly to me.
What's so
I'm
funny?
Sorry. There's nothing funny about it. It's just, it provokes the same extremity of response every time, and I'm very sorry
so
that's the case.
So moving on. So that movie comes out. My brother takes me and my stepbrother go to the movie. He was over 18 at the time, so he could go see the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the rule with R-rated movies, you have to be 21 to buy tickets for other people.
Okay.
So we win, and he could not bring us into the theater. So he respectfully also didn't watch it, and we all went home and called it a day. So we didn't get to see it in the theater. Fast forward to some point, and the movie came out on streaming or whatever, and we watched it, and I watched it at home, and I thought it was like the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life.
It's a very slow and methodical film.
So,
Yes.
because I watched it at home and didn't get the right experience watching, I've always said if it comes back to a theater, I would like to see this movie because I think my opinion on it would change.
Okay.
And it did.
Well, we'll get into that momentarily. Fortuitously, it was, I think I'm saying that word right.
Yeah.
It was screening as part of a complete retrospective of the works of Denis Villeneuve in the lead up to his recent Dune Part Two, which is still, as we were talking about right before this court, is still completely selling out.
500 million now, right? At this time.
Yeah, the one like real IMAX in the city is sold out until like a couple weeks into April.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Like basically as far out as it's scheduled. I think the next movie that might like contractually have a right to the IMAX screen, I believe, is Godzilla versus Kong. Or
yes,
Godzilla
that is filmed for IMAX, yes.
Yes, is the next one that is like contractually obligated.
Which is this Friday, right? The 29th, I think. So,
is it? Yeah, this coming Friday.
This coming Friday.
So, yeah, it's the only Villeneuve I ended up seeing in this series.
Oh, really?
I'm sorry, it's not the only one I've seen. It's the only one I saw as part of this retrospective. It was screening at what is my favorite theater in the city, the Walter Reed Theater at Film at Lincoln Center.
Mm-hmm.
You and I had actually previously been there to see a Guy Madden film called Cowards Bend the Knee. It's about an hour long. It's a very bizarre, it's not a very commercial film.
Yeah.
But I was glad you got to see the theater. I was glad you got to come back to it. And I was really glad we saw it under these circumstances because we saw it like sold out.
And it was like we were the only two people the other time we went to that theater. So it was dramatically different.
Yeah. So you got to see two different extremities.
Different.
That's what repertory film going is like. You know,
Right.
it's you are either totally like in this big sold out crowd, or you are one of six people who showed up to a movie that nobody has heard of prior. But we got to see it in what I would say is outside of like a wide scale re-release, like what they recently did with Tenet.
Right. Tenet.
Outside of that, this is probably the closest you're going to get to like an opening weekend viewing of this movie.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, because you have
you
have a sold out enthusiastic crowd.
Right.
How did you feel? Did you feel like we are hitting your criteria for this is the proper experience?
Well, so you remember the first thing when you texted me and said Blade Runner's coming back, what was the first thing I said to you? I said, what are we talking here in terms of theater? How's this showing?
Yeah.
And when you said Walter Reed, I will be honest with you, I did not get immediately excited. But you're such a fan of that theater that I trusted you. So we went, and I have to say, the screen size is one thing, right? That's not something you can worry about so much. The screen isn't, but the quality of the screen there is super high. The clarity is through the roof. And like laser projection now, like the AMC's has made such a game changer. You could see the quality of that theater, and the sound was also really solid too. Like, and for a movie like Blade Runner, where sound is, well, Denis Villeneuve in general with sound is always a big deal.
It's very, it's more at the forefront than I think with a lot of modern directors.
So in that sense, I don't think, to your question, I don't think anything was missing. Like, I don't feel like if I saw the film again in a different context, I would have felt better or worse about it. But this was elevated from my first time seeing it at home. It was certainly a different experience in that sense.
Okay. So all that being said, do you feel like you have, have you had the appropriate opportunity to experience this movie the way you meant it was supposed to be?
This was it.
This was it. Okay.
Because the amount of people in the theater is a big part of it too.
I think that's almost more important than like format or presentation itself.
You could be right. You could be right.
Because I don't know. I mean, you can even prove this by saying, like, if you're at home, you know, with 6 people and one person there is like, this is a great movie. Everybody, we got to sit down and watch this. And everybody is locked in and engaged. In my opinion, that means that like the audience that you have with you, in that case, it's just your friends, you know, you have the lights down low in your living room. That can be the best way to see a movie if, you know, you have the right people with you and if everybody is locked into it.
Well, the only problem with that logic is at home is never the best way to watch a movie. But I see your point.
Largely not, you know.
I agree with your point.
I admit that as time has gone by, I have fewer and fewer viewing experiences at home that I feel were optimal.
Yeah, that's a good point too. If I think back long term, is there a film I've watched at home where I said, so this is interesting. Next week, you know, A24 is bringing back some of the movies to IMAX.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
I saw that.
Next week, I'm seeing Ex Machina. When I saw that, I saw it at home, and I immediately said, this movie was crazy good. So I'm very curious now, going back next week, how am I going to feel about it? Because it's not an IMAX movie. It's not made for IMAX. But how that's going to compare to watching it at home. Because that's one of a few movies where I was like at home, and even I said, okay, this is a legit movie.
It's something about just being in the theater that inherently, like, even if you are somebody who like occasionally pulls out your phone to check, there's the kind of pressure around you that like you need to do it quickly.
Most people are good about it too, I will say. Most people are.
I have varying responses. I will say, since like post-pandemic, I have found that people their attention spans are totally shot. Nobody cares about having their phone out. Like I would say that almost every single time I'm at a screening at an AMC, somebody pulls a phone out at some point.
I must start making a checklist because I haven't found that many. But I just see, I think people, the talking and the phones, so there's some of it. Smartwatches is the other thing that you have to pay attention to.
Smartwatches
are some shortcuts.
One of the biggest selling points for going to a movie for me is to kind of get lost in time too. Like I like to know roughly going in, okay, you know, 20 minutes for trailers, however long the movie is. This is roughly the time I'll get out, and I like to know that going in. But I don't check my phone unless I really hate the movie. I don't check my like what time it is throughout. And I often have that spoiled for me kind of against my will when people like non-maliciously will like raise their wrist when they're over to the side of me and the light will catch my eye and I'll turn over and I'll see, oh shoot, we got 40 minutes left.
Yeah, that's no fun.
Yeah. And it's nobody is doing that to her. And like, cause it's, you know, it's an honest mistake. Sometimes people just forget to like put their watch in theater mode. But yeah, it's just one of those ways that
theater mode.
Yeah,
that's a setting on the phone. Theater mode.
Yeah,
oh, for real?
Yeah. Lily has she has an Apple Watch and she turns it into theater
that's
mode
hilarious.
every single time when she like it's. And I always thought it was just do not disturb, but I think that's so that it won't light up no matter what.
When you lift it, right?
I think if it's do not disturb, it'll still respond. This is scintillating talk about the features of the Apple Watch.
I was going to go here. I just want to ask, this is completely unrelated to kind of, but when you saw Dune, did AMC, you saw it on AMC? Lincoln Square, right?
Dune Part Two or Dune?
Yeah, I'm just skipping around, but Dune Part Two.
Yes.
Did they have the new AMC Theaters intro at your screening?
I think so.
Because I've been there a couple times and I've seen 3 different intros in the last, and I'm very confused by what's happening. I've seen 2 Dolby intros, 3 AMC intros. Things are very strange right now.
I want to touch on it a little bit, and then at some point we will actually talk about.
I'm glad you wanted to touch on the AMC intro though.
I think it's worth touching on. So they announced that they were like, we're shooting this new one, and I thought, as is often the case, they're like, we have this thing that kind of unexpectedly went viral. It's maintained popularity. I personally am a little sick of the intro. Like I'm really like, I go to the movies a lot.
Well, you notice it's an abbreviated one now they use, a shorter one.
I thought when they said we're making another one that they were going to make something like kind of self-aware, referencing the fact that the first one became so popular. I'm very relieved that is not the case. It seems like the new version is, as you said, basically a trimmed down one that features different movies that Nicole Kidman is seeing.
And she changes her slogan. She says, "We make magic" is the new slogan for AMC.
Yes.
Instead of "We make movies better."
An equally anodyne and meaningless slogan, just like the first one that as I told you, have heard 1 billion times and actually can't remember for you right now.
You know what the craziest part though is? Before that, before or after, when they play the throw your trash out, here's the exits, that whole AMC thing, they say a thank you to our investors in their intro.
Yeah, they started doing that. And I
find that so funny. It's actually crazy.
Is that any sort of reference to the fact that they kind of became a bit of a meme stock?
I think it's them buying into the memes.
What's funny is that is 3 years too late. Like that's
it took them 4 years. Their old intro was from 2020. It took them 4 years. I know
that's the funny thing is that they had this intro.
So maybe they're working on it for 3 years.
There was 100 years of movies, 1920 to 2020. I was like, if you're a movie theater chain, in my opinion, you're probably wanting to remind people of the year 2020 as little as possible.
Yeah, that's actually a funny point.
It's really funny to me that they're emphasizing the year that basically nobody was going to their theaters.
Funny. But it's a century.
But yeah, so I am happy that it's shorter because I'm frankly just tired of seeing it.
Yeah, but the Nicole Kidman part is shorter. The rest of it is longer. I felt like I was sitting in the theater for literally 5 minutes yesterday just listening to AMC talk about themselves.
Yeah, they have this new like pre-roll or it's like B-roll.
I don't know what it is. I don't know.
Of like people interacting metatextually with the movies as they're watching them.
That's pretty funny.
It's like, I mean, have you seen the pre-roll at the, what's the Regal?
I don't remember it.
It's very,
what do they do?
I don't want to spoil it. Well, I guess.
See, but I'm never going to step foot in a Regal again.
Okay, so
it's going to be a while.
Basically,
it'll be updated by the time I go back.
It's a party of people that show up for a movie screening and they just walk up to each other and they just quote random movies at each other. Like like somebody walks out of the bathroom and says, "Do not go in there," or they go to sit down and someone says, "You can't sit with us." It's terrible. It's like it's those level of, and just people saying these with an incredibly self-satisfied tone to each other. It's cringy in a way that like makes it genuinely kind of difficult to watch. At this point, it's worse than the Nicole Kidman thing. I'm more tired of seeing the Nicole Kidman because I go there more often. I don't go to Regal all that often. Once in a blue, when I thought the Union Square one was closing down, I made a point of going there a couple times. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Well, they filed for bankruptcy or whatever, right?
They did, but I forget what actually happened. But from what I understand, they should have been shut down by now, and they're still operating. So good for them, I guess.
We were sort of. What else do you do with a movie theater, right? If it goes away, you can't really do much else.
That's kind of the thing. As this has been a crisis in Manhattan rent going up, and I can't believe that we're doing this whole sidebar here.
We're gonna get to the movie. Don't worry, plenty of time.
There's all these places that they're getting priced out because rent was skyrocketing in Manhattan,
right?
And the movie theater was one of. They couldn't afford to renew their lease. I don't know what deal has happened, but I know at the time they were saying, well, we can't do it. So the landlord is just going to try and farm it out to someone else. And as you said, it's a building with 20 or so auditoriums. What else could you can't even turn it into a department store.
I don't know what you do with that.
They're auditoriums. They have stairs built into them. It would be like a year-long renovation to turn that into any sort of other usable space. And even so, the layout would be so confusing.
Yeah, I don't know.
It doesn't make any sense as anything other than
blow walls up and do like it's like you could do like a Macy's in Herald Square kind of thing where it's like 10 stories tall and stuff.
Maybe, but that's very
today's
difficult.
Day and age, that probably would never happen.
No. That's a very difficult to navigate store, I think.
So that's how cinemas will live on. Because
that's how
there's
cinemas
nothing
will
else
live
you
on.
can do with them.
That's how cinemas will live on is the fact that they're so weird in their layout that no other business could viably use the space they'd previously been used. So they'll be allowed to operate at a loss.
It's called being smart right there.
Sure. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about
I'm good now. I got everything off my chest. I'm good.
No. I think that we have we've done as much as we possibly can about the state of like commercial film chains, right?
It's thriving.
They're doing
I don't know if thriving is well. That popcorn bucket for Dune certainly helped AMC's cause a little bit because that was apparently sold out everywhere. So that was a little way of talk about the memes, talk about the jokes. That's how AMC is going to make it back. Popcorn buckets.
That's the thing is, have you seen the new Ghostbusters one?
It's like the Marshmallow Man, whatever he's
it's
called.
It's Slimer, the green guy, but the popcorn comes out of it's like a Mr. Potato Head. You open it out of the back and you eat popcorn out of his ass. Like I don't. These are and I actually, now that I'm thinking of, I think that's actually Regal's. So they saw they saw the Dune popcorn bucket and was like, well, we can one up you there, and just made something more overtly sexual. And that seems to like that weirdly. Movie theater chain popcorn buckets are now like having a horny off.
And they're expensive, man. They're like $35 to get but the Dune one makes like, why if I want to get my popcorn, why would I have to put my hand through something that could attack me? It's very spiky. Instead of just getting the popcorn, it makes zero logical sense. That's the part of it.
My issue with it, and like the answer to your question is that they're not designed with practicality in mind.
Do you think they knew what they were doing when they made that popcorn bucket? Just making sure. I'm just making sure.
Do you know how many people have to sign off on something like that?
How many? How many people? Can I ask? How many people have to sign off on it?
A lot is my answer. But do you know how many people have to be like, yeah, that's good? Of course, there's intentionality behind it.
Just the intern who had a funny idea and they said sure. I don't know how popcorn buckets get made.
Neither do I guess. Apparently, it's whatever is the horniest possible way you can go about making it.
Is there a Godzilla and Kong popcorn bucket? I'd be curious.
I don't know. Let's look up and see if
because I've seen the Kung Fu Panda 4 one. It's just Poe, very nice with a nice smile, holding popcorn. It's very simple. But what can you do with Godzilla and Kong?
Let's see. Godzilla cross Kong popcorn bucket. Let's see here.
Oh, there is one.
It's boring. It's just like a.
No, that can't be it. That's just got to be the.
This is on AMC's website. We'll post a picture of it, but it's just in orange and blue.
Oh, that's crazy.
Godzilla is blue and King Kong is orange.
No, that's just that. After this trend they've been on, that's just.
I know, that's really disappointing.
You could do some funny things with that. I
want to eat popcorn out of Godzilla's asshole or whatever. Like that's. I guess
and
you're
probably not the only person that says that after this Dune fiasco.
I hope I'm the only person.
No, I don't think you are. After the Dune situation.
Yes.
Sold out.
Mine is that it's buttery and salty. Why do you want to be dragging it up through something and then getting butter on that and then going back in through a layer of butter wipes? There's no other way to describe those little kind of prongs.
Butter wipes.
What else would you possibly call them? Like fronds?
I'm sure there's a canonical term for their spikes.
Well, those are teeth on the actual sand. We can't discuss I'm talking about on the bucket. Yeah. Those are teeth on the sandworm itself.
Well, I don't know the material. I don't know if they're pliable or they're a hard plastic.
They're rubber, so you can go in and out. We're describing. You and I are just reenacting a shareholders meeting or something.
Yeah, you're probably right. But someone at some point had to say, you know what, we're going with this.
Yeah. We're finally going to make our way back to Blade Runner now.
You sure?
Yes, we are. Because I'm going to say something.
Smooth segue.
I'm going to say something that may change how people say whatever you say about the movie. Unless this has changed since we went to the screening, you have not seen Blade Runner?
Oh, the first one? No.
No.
Would you have preferred I saw it before this? Just out of curiosity.
What I'll tell you is that if I hadn't seen it, I would have made a point of going and seeing it beforehand. Okay. Why did you feel you didn't need to? And I don't mean to say this. I'm genuinely curious.
I just don't watch movies at home, genuinely. And I also feel like the first one came out in 1982, the first Blade Runner?
82, yes.
We're talking about 35 years of difference. So I think in that context, they're making a Blade Runner sequel knowing that people that are 20 years old have probably not seen the original movie. So I think they kind of made it aware of the fact that you can watch that second film without needing to see the first because of the amount of time that passed between them. And I don't know. Would you describe 2049 as a direct sequel or a continuation of it? I think it to me does not rely overtly on what happened before it.
It is a continuation is a good word for it because it doesn't have the same protagonist. The protagonist of the first movie is a heavily firmly supporting character in the next one. There are a couple small parts that translate over, but really there's not a ton of continuity between the two of them. And I guess because the second movie kind of purports to answer or address some questions that the first movie leaves open to interpretation. But I suppose, how much cultural knowledge do you have of the first?
I just can tell you nothing about it other than the fact that Harrison Ford is in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, I know nothing about it.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you just truly didn't know anything about it.
I just saw 2049 because my brother said, let's go and see it out of mere curiosity. I like science fiction.
And it's a new sci-fi movie.
That's really the only reason why. Anything sci-fi that comes out, I just kind of go see. I don't.
Well, it's funny you say you like sci-fi and you won't watch it at home.
You know, I watch contemporary movies. I don't really watch a lot of older movies. The only ones so interesting. This is like the timing we're talking about. This is very interesting because you think about the new Alien trailer just came out, right?
Sure.
So I saw the original Alien at home because during the pandemic.
Sure.
You talk about a movie, Planet of the Apes. That's coming out soon too.
Sure.
Seen none of those movies, but my big goal was to go back and rewatch them.
Yeah.
But this movie that's coming out, the new one, it has nothing to do apparently with the old ones. So there's no real reason to go back and watch them unless they come back.
It does and it doesn't, because as you'll learn with the Planet of the Apes movies, there's a lot about the kind of cyclical nature of like the way events happen, basically. Does that make sense?
I like that. Interesting. I see.
The fact that every generation over the course of a society, and even societies as they stack on top of each other, tend to end up making the same mistakes over and over again. And that's what a lot of those movies end up being about.
I see.
And it's also conveniently how they kind of structurally make themselves work one after another. So that's a fair point. I don't think you necessarily have to see Blade Runner 82 to enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
It's a different context. Sounds like you have shifted your opinion on this movie. What changed for you this time?
So I think, first off, having a better understanding of Denis Villeneuve as a filmmaker is a big deal, because at the time, 2049, I don't think I'd seen any of his other movies. I knew nothing about film in general, really, honestly. Now I've seen Arrival by him, and obviously Dune came out. And this whole Dune thing is obviously Denis Villeneuve has been talked about a lot with the Dune situation.
Sure.
So having more context about how he makes his films, I think, is a big deal, because it is a slow burn. 2049, there's just no way around that. I still think it's a slow movie. His movies tend to be a little bit dry, but like that, when you start to actually dissect his movies and you watch it, when it's like your sole focus is watching his movies, you start to understand more of his character development, how strong that is. And for me, I go to movies for visuals. That's like the number one thing for me. I have photography is something that I love, and videography is my background into all this stuff. So like I go for visuals, and there's probably nobody better at visuals than Denis Villeneuve. I don't think that's controversial to say that.
Not at all.
So like, I mean, these movies are stunning.
It's sumptuous, you know.
And like that alone, I don't even care what the story is. You can just look at these movies. They're moving images, you know, they're moving pictures, basically, these movies. I mean, and what he does in 2049, I mean, that's probably the best looking movie I've seen personally. I mean, period. I had actually just straight up never seen it. It was something that I had. Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about that. That's another part we should talk about. Like, this is the first time you saw this movie.
This is the first time I've seen this movie.
That's like a bigger deal than me here. That's way more. So what did you think of it?
I kind of immediately was in love with it. It's this.
I have so many questions for you now, man.
It's this kind of like big, dense, contemplative, and that's such a great tone for a story that is already kind of ambiguous and just takes its time dealing with like what does it actually mean to be human? These sorts of things.
Raises great questions.
It is like thematically and tonally, it's such an appropriate follow up to the original Blade Runner,
which you saw.
Yes.
And why did you not see 2049 when it came out?
I think I would have just been out of college. I don't know. I like.
That's not a reason.
No. I'm trying to place why in my like timeline of my life why I didn't prioritize it. Honestly, it's just a time in my life when I really wasn't going to movies very often.
Okay, fair.
You know what it was? I just moved to New York. I didn't have any money to go to the movies. Yeah, I just moved here. I was like, that was a time in my life where I was working entirely freelance, and every single month I would get to the end of it, and somebody who owed me money hadn't sent me a check in the mail yet, and every single month I would go, this is gonna be the month. It's all gonna be fucked up. I'm gonna have to go back, and then somebody would mail me something to figure it out. So I wasn't thinking about going to the movies all that much. I was just kind of skating by, and then in the meantime, why had I not watched it? I guess the same reason anybody doesn't watch a movie like this at home, because, like you said, that it's very hard to get into something at home, knowing this is a very long movie. This is a very kind of slow movie. It is so much harder at home when you are not like locked into an auditorium that has all the lights shut off and you can't have your phone on at all. You know, like it is harder to lock in at home. And therefore for me anyway, harder to get excited about at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I had never gone out of my way for it. But I kind of was just like immediately in with this thing. And this isn't a movie that people really cheer or laugh or like orally respond to, basically.
No.
But the mood in the room was so locked in and engaged, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody who was there to see this thing, they were so into this thing. They loved it. And I kind of like coasted off that, like the electricity in the air. I don't know. How did you feel about how the rest of the crowd was receiving this movie?
That's an interesting point because it's one of those things with movies, right, where you go sometimes. So I saw The Matrix again the other day, and there's a part and everybody who's going to see The Matrix in the theater at this point knows what happens. And like you get to the end of the movie, and there's like one dude in the front row who's like cheering when there's like a big moment in the movie.
Yeah.
I didn't really remember anything about it, so I was like just surprised by this
You
moment.
had seen The Matrix prior,
yeah, I'd seen it, but I don't really remember it. But everyone else is kind of like chuckling at that person that's like cheering in excitement, because that's when and a similar thing. They're bringing the Phantom Menace back to theaters next month, and like
you
people
really like
people are gonna some movies like that, you're going back to relive your highlights, right? Stuff that brings you joy in a theater, Whereas this, when you go and watch Blade Runner again, you're not going for that reason. You're not going to cheer or to have an emotion like that.
No,
you're kind of going just to live in that world.
You're almost kind of going and hoping that you can witness that happen for somebody else.
Like it's the first time.
One of my favorite experiences on like a Saturday at 12, I saw Muppets Take Manhattan at the Metrograph like a while back. And it was like they play like kid-friendly programming midday on the weekends so the kids can come to them basically. And I went to this showing and my sister was out of town. So I was like, this is an easy thing. It gets us to an interesting part of the city. I'll take you here. It's a short movie. It's an easy to watch movie. And then you get to see a cool theater in the process. Mm-hmm. And there's this little boy who's like 2 or 3 seats behind us. And every time Kermit does anything funny in the movie, he's just like losing his shit. Like and not like in a disruptive way. And it just like, I can't believe things can be this funny to me. Like he's just like freaking out. And I'm kind of like, the hell yeah, man. Good for you. Like he's kind of like realizing that this thing can be as great as it is.
Yeah.
And you're right. I kind of am always hoping that I can just be witness to somebody really like have this big enlightened moment whenever I'm watching something that I know has a lot of cultural importance to people.
Yes.
And this is an audience that I think, this is a Denis Villeneuve retrospective at a repertory film theater that like is very well known among like the New York cinephile community of a movie that is like popular from a director that is popular in the lead up to his very anticipated, new movie that's a sequel to a movie that was also incredibly popular.
Yeah.
So you've got this room full of people that are and it's not like it's a new movie and there's like even that jitters of like, oh, this new one that might be bad.
Yeah.
They are like, they're so on board for it. And it was the ideal situation in which to absorb this thing. But I just totally fell in love with Gosling, who's also like coming off a really hot year.
I have interesting thoughts about him because I don't think he's like an amazing actor, to be honest with you. He's like, to me, always plays the same guy in a lot of his movies. But with Blade Runner, I think the role fits him very well because his job is to be kind of not human, right? His job is to be robotic. And he plays that really well, like the stone cold killer kind of attitude. He sells it well in that movie. I think it serves him well.
I think it's that his face is very subtle.
Yeah, he shows a lot of emotion without really doing anything. Yeah,
that's
it's not over the top.
And you realize that means a lot of it is in the eyes, which means that he's not really changing expression as much. I walked away from this movie thinking, I was like, God, he's the main character of this movie. And he's also like arguably the most interesting character in the movie, which is not all.
The movie surrounds his story.
Those two things are very rarely often the same. The main character is also the most interesting character.
That's true. Yeah.
He is such a generous scene partner. It was my big takeaway here is that even though this is his movie, every time he's on screen with somebody else, the way he's not minimizing himself, but it's like we said about like the face and how the way that he acts without putting too much into it, too much panache. It means he is giving his scene partners the opportunity to do what they need to do without distracting from it. And I think that's a really important thing to know when you're playing the main character of something, meaning that you need to be the baseline in every scene that you're in. And as each person, supporting characters, other like main-ish characters come in, they be given the opportunity to kind of have their moment to shine because they represent a changing of the status quo. Whereas, and it doesn't mean that you need to be a nerd. And I don't know. Would you describe him as like totally unreactive in this movie? No.
I mean, but again, like you think about not to spoil anything, but like, when he finds out the reality of his life, right? Like he has a very like stoic reaction to it because I think he understands that like his life it's that question of what's human, right? It's that question of what does your life mean? What is his life in a context compared to a regular human's life? All sorts of those questions like that. So I think a nerd is not the right word. He's a very active participant in the movie, obviously, as an actor, but almost by being disengaged from it, if that makes sense. Like his character's withdrawal from what's happening is almost his way of showing he's alive in the movie.
It's an interesting point that you find him in the movie because he's unenthusiastic despite the fact that he's like a pretty competent at his job.
Pretty competent, yeah, I would say so.
It's I think it's just kind of that he's part of this system. Sorry, I didn't mean to put my foot in your hands.
No, I was just, that was my fault. We just broke the whole flow by me bothering you.
It's interesting that he is he's in this place in his life, the character is, it's Agent K, I think. Not Agent K. That's...
Is it just K?
Yeah, it's literally just K.
Just K.
K is Men in Black. He's figuring out how to reconcile with the fact that I think that the interesting change is the first movie is like, is it all an illusion? Is kind of the big defining question of that movie.
What is it?
Life. Am I human? Is what I'm doing actually, does it matter? That's
surrounding Harrison Ford's character.
Yes,
right?
That's surrounding Harrison's Ford character. And it's this big question. That movie ends on this question of, is he a replicant or is he a human being? This movie dispenses with that ambiguity whatsoever. I think to reflect the time that we live in, because we're all hyper aware of the fact that we are like commodified every single day. The simple act of like, the simple act of like sitting on your couch for an hour, at some point you are going to pick up your phone, you're going to see an ad and somebody is going to make money off of you while you're just sitting there on your couch. And we all have gotten way past the point of actually being outraged by that fact. We've gotten to the point where we've normalized it and accepted it as part of our day-to-day existence. And I think Kay is in a similar place where he's accepted this element of his life that he's kind of a traitor to his own kind, because his job is to go. We didn't really describe the movie. We don't really have time to do that, but like, I think you should just go see Blade Runner. And then, this is mostly just color commentary. We're not generally, I don't have a spoiler rule, we'll spoil something, but we haven't super done that in this movie.
No.
That first scene where you see him take down Dave Bautista, who is the older model replicant that it's his job to kind of dispatch.
Yes.
He knows that he is basically a race traitor, and he's accepted that, and he doesn't like it, but he's understood that being complicit in it is his lot in life. He doesn't really have a choice because, as we see immediately when he's being debriefed about that, he has to go sit down and do this really invasive...
Yeah, that's a strange scene, yeah.
He has to go sit down and do this really invasive procedure that determines if he is still mentally stable enough to be doing his job.
It's pretty crazy, yeah.
And he's like, well, because I know that I have to go in for those checks regularly, I can't walk away from this, and I can't... We talk about how he's like, he's not as emotionally invested. He's like, I can't get over invested, or I can't get emotional one way or another, because if I do, then I'm going to give away the fact that like I have some malaise and I'm not really enthusiastic about doing this anymore. I don't know. I guess that's what I'm saying, is that the script is doing a lot of work there, but I think Gosling is reacting to it well. He's not just doing nothing. He's reacting really slowly and methodically, I think, because when you've been in a situation as long as Kay seems to have been at the start of the movie, you realize that like when you are in a situation like this, it's so you're so stuck that if there's any minute chance you're going to change it, you have to be 100% sure that your next action is going to actually like work, basically.
Well, and how different is that from our own lives, right? That notion of, that's the question, right? Like this guy who's very robotic, he's doing the same things the rest of us are, walking through the world, simply fulfilling a job.
Yes.
That he's probably not that thrilled with. And that's a good question. Do you think he likes his job in the movie?
No, I don't think so. Because you see, like I said, the opening scene where he kills Dave Bautista's character, there's no sense of satisfaction afterwards. He's not like, I'm good at this.
But does that mean he dislikes his job, or that he's just so focused on it that he doesn't show any reaction toward it?
I think in the most...
focus is a sign of loving something, right?
In the most blunt... Not necessarily.
I think it is.
I mean, well, then you
I'm
could
not going to
argue-
focus on my studying for school if I don't like the class, you know? Well, I shouldn't say it. Take it back.
Well,
Depends.
in that same thing is like, I think what he loves is not having to deal with the alternative to whatever his life is.
That's a good point. Yeah,
which is probably just being decommissioned, you know, like, and also as the guy who does the decommissioning, he knows how unpleasant that probably is for somebody.
That's a good point too.
So he's just trying to avoid it. I don't know. So I really love Gosling in this movie, and the ways that he tries to find, I mean, this is getting more again into just like the way that the story is layered in, and how I think that this is very bluntly, like a topical movie, you know, about the way that we choose to live our lives, because the solace that he finds in the Ana de Armas character, Joy.
She's the most interesting, to me, she's the most interesting part of the film, probably. Well, I shouldn't say that, but her character is the heart of the film, I think, in a lot of ways.
I think so. And you get a lot of emotional investment in her, because you see that he put so much emotional investment in her.
This person is not even real, right? Which is like, that's something pretty strong about that, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and I don't know. I think that the whole thing, that I always run into this issue when I'm talking about a big or super culturally significant movie, is saying things other than it's really good, I liked it, or like what I basically just did, go off on a long tangent describing something that multiple people have probably written like dissertations about at this point. You know what I mean? Like it's
right. You're not saying anything new, right?
Yes. Yeah. But going into it, like as somebody who's like coming to it, this is a 7-year-old movie at this point, much later
it
than
doesn't feel like that. That's the other thing too. Like when you watch this movie, this looks more real than 99% of films that come out today. And it's a movie that takes place 30 years, 20 years from now.
It looks fantastic. And it calls to mind the fact that last year, not overall a bad year for movies at the box office, but a lot of the things that used to feel like sure bets are now floundering. You know, like it was a very bad year for Marvel at the box office overall last year. Mm-hmm. And Dune came after. Dune looks especially good because even by Dune Part Two, anyway, especially even by the standards of January and February, which are always trash in terms of new releases every single year without fail, they're dumping ground for things that like the studio has a contractual obligation to get out or whatever.
Yeah.
This has been a particularly bad January and February season in 2024. Yes. So Dune comes on the heels of that and kind of blows everybody away because there was all that more anticipation for it because it was delayed because of the strike.
Yeah. Warner Brothers marketing has been killing it too. The last couple movies, they've really done a good job.
Absolutely. And this thing it looks fantastic. We can talk about Dune Part 2 a little bit if you want.
Yeah, my next poem's related to it.
Yeah. I thought it was fantastic. As I was telling you beforehand, I went into it. I had to work a long day. I was up at about 3:00 in the morning that day. Woo-hoo. As we were talking about earlier in the show, it has been sold out at the Lincoln Square IMAX for weeks and is continuing to be sold out like for weeks ahead of time. I had a hard time. Like, not because the movie was boring. We had a hard time staying like alert and locked in with it.
Because these movies, again, they take time. They like marinade is what they do. They just sit there and they build and build and build and build.
Yes. And I've read the book. I definitely found myself a couple times throughout, like not quite nodding off, but you know, like losing focus for a couple moments at a time and then having to re-jog myself with knowledge from having read the book. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like if I didn't know the story already, I might have been a little lost going in.
Because that movie,
but again, not saying that that's going to be representative of most people watching this thing. But I'm sorry, what was your point about Dune 2?
Well, so I think in general, if you read the articles that are going out around Dune 2, people have made this big point about how Denis Villeneuve's movies in this age of like corporatization and all these movies being like the studio heads say to do this, to do that. There's been a lot of actors actually talking about that too, how like movies nowadays are made by committee, not by individuals. How it's just all these people in a boardroom who say we got to get this stuff in the movie, and that's what dictates what gets made. That's the day and age we live in. But his movies, they feel like they don't live within that constraint. They feel like he has full creative vision over his movies. And that's something people have really adored, is that they feel like they're movies that are made by him, not by a studio.
Yes. I think that his works exemplify a really good distinction between adaptation, which all of these movies definitely are.
His next movie is also an adaptation. That's what he does.
They're taking other people's characters and putting them into a different medium, versus like, I wouldn't really call what you're talking about like corporate, the way that most blockbuster franchises are constructed now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call what most of them are doing adaptation. They're just taking those characters and kind of
throwing them in a sandbox and saying, what can we do? It's the most fun with it.
Yes. And they're not doing this in a way where they're like, do I have anything interesting to say by including this character?
No, not at all. Not at all.
They're just putting them on screen to be recognized, which is funny because if you want to use the Marvel example, they've now gotten to the point where they've done that with every like widely recognized character. And they're now putting things on screen that you have to go on YouTube and find somebody who has been really deep in comics for decades and will tell you like, this is a reference to this thing. So it's this weird.
There's that side of it. And then there's the other side of it where it's like, oh, let's just put Deadpool and Wolverine together because it'll make $1 billion. And that's true too, you know? And look, there's a place for those type of movies, but there's also a place for Denis type of movies, because I'll guarantee to you, Blade Runner 2049 is not the movie that the studio would have made, right? It's certainly not.
Oh, no.
That's the movie he made.
The movie cost a lot of money, cost about $150 million. And it budgeted, I think like 270-ish, something in there. So like, obviously that's a reported budget. Or it grossed about 270-ish.
I was going to say, that's a heck of a job coming in at 120 million under budget.
Yeah. It's one of those movies where like, it wasn't a flop, but there's a reason why there has been zero talk of a third Blade Runner.
And you know that, because there's a TV show coming out, though. There is you know about that?
Is it an
Blade
animated
Runner
show?
2099. I forget what it's actually is.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Which I'm curious about, but
sure, why not?
And again, Blade Runner is not a franchise that like is. It's a movie, not a franchise, right? Yes. It's not a franchise. It's a movie. You know, now it has a sequel. It's not.
Yeah.
There's no books, comics, video games.
It really does feel like, because again, the original Blade Runner is not like a huge runaway success either.
No, it's a cult classic in some ways, right? Yeah.
So the idea of like, we want to turn this into a franchise, I don't think that was ever anybody's actual intent.
But Denis comes along and says, I want to do this thing, right?
Yeah, because it sounds like he had a good idea for this.
And he's been trusted enough where studios will say, this guy knows how to make films. We're going to let him do it. And that's not something that's like super common. There's certain directors that get that type of status, but he seems like he's in a league of his own where he gets a lot of freedom in the movies he makes. And I honestly, look, you can debate how good his movies really are. I do think that's a matter of debate, but you cannot deny that they're made with love, they're made with care, and they're at a quality that's higher than 90% of what you're going to get.
I need to see Dune 2 again, because this seems to be a bit of an outlier opinion from what I can tell. I adore the first Dune. I think it's basically flawless for what it's trying to achieve.
But that's the key. What is it trying to achieve? It's trying to tell you what's going on.
And Dune Part 2, I think, is an immaculately put together movie that I have some gripes with some of the storytelling, and I don't think all the performances totally land for me.
Who are we talking about here?
Primarily, I think Chalamet is excellent in the first one.
Dude, no, don't even go there.
The way they ask him to go big in the new movie,
you didn't buy it.
I think that he goes too exaggerated. But
I was scared of the guy by the end of the movie. I think the fact that the thing that's great about Paul Atreides is I think he's one of the best characters in film, period. Because you think about this guy who's like, he's a little kid when the first movie comes around. He's just like, I'm here to try to follow my father's footsteps, something 90% of people can relate to, right? It's a very common thing. Then you get to this movie, and by the end of it, his arc is rushed, certainly, but by the end of this movie, he goes from that shy little kid to literally leading a group of people with absolute venom. To fulfill his purpose. And I believe that arc. And Paul is not a hero. That's the point of this.
No, he's not.
That's really
and
important.
I think that might be my biggest issue with it, is that it even though the two movies, like in terms of like chronology, they basically just happen back to back. The second effectively picks up right where the first leaves off.
But the time span across the second movie is wide, though. I think a lot happens in the second film that you don't see.
I have a harder time tracking with the changes that are happening internally with Paul over the course, in terms of the way I'm experiencing the time over the course of that 3 hours or so.
Well, again, because that second film, you don't have. This is the joys of an adaptation, right? You can't, Dune especially, Dune is so dense, you can't take everything from that book and put it in a movie. You got to pick what you want to do.
Yeah.
And his arc, seeing the nuances of that was not his priority. It was focusing on the Fremen, and it was focused on Chaney, who we've talked about.
Absolutely, who gets bumped up from basically not being a character.
I was saying, I don't remember her being in the book like at all, really. I thought she was like a vision in the book.
She's in the book.
I don't even know what she does in the book.
I mean, she's his love interest, but it didn't
feel that strong in the book. It didn't feel like
she's
it
not.
does in the
she's
movie.
not fully expanded upon in the way that the adaptation changed the character to be in this movie. I think it's a good choice. Frankly,
I think
because,
especially good for contemporary time.
Well, because it's one of the things that makes the book and the story in general feel so retrograde, which is good because Zendaya is like really popular. Like that's a good thing for this movie.
Right now. And that love interest, her and Paul, is the core of that movie. Like, because that's what ties you to it. It's not the reason why they say that movie's so tragic. Not to spoil everything, but like, is the fact that you want so desperately to see that all work out, but their lives are going down different paths, and like that's the reality you got to face. So that's the thing about Denis that I think I have respected more.
Have you read Messiah, the second book?
No, and I'm debating. I don't know what you think. Is it a book? Should you read that before watching Messiah the movie?
I think that's probably a smart thing to do because it's what I can tell you is that based off the ending of Dune Part 2 already, there are pretty huge divergences.
That's my point. So like, do you want to?
You might want to see how the original story played out. Hey, everybody, jumping in to talk to you right here in the middle of an episode real quick. We had a brief technical error that means that we don't have the video for the last 5 to 6 minutes of this episode. Yeah, I broke it. We're going to play the audio for you because we have the audio, but just wanted to make sure that nobody was too confused. So we decided to throw this little disclaimer in there, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. And until next time.
No, that's 6 minutes from now.
That's 6 minutes. Until next time, that's 6 minutes from now. Bye-bye. Just to kind of have that to compare and contrast, because I always like to do that. I always prefer.
That's what I did with Dune 1. As I said, I'm going to read the book so I know what we're dealing with here. But with Messiah, it's like we're now going down a different path. Like Messiah is not going to relate fully to what we're watching.
It sounds like there
will
be some pretty like radically big changes made.
That's what I'm saying. So how much does the book setting yourself up for disappointment versus informing you on what's about to happen? I don't know. It's a fine line to walk there, And sometimes walking in blind is kind of a good thing, right? Like,
I don't think that there's a wrong decision to make. I don't think you'll regret reading it if you choose to. And I don't think you'll be sitting in the theater watching Messiah thinking, man, I wish I had the knowledge.
Because you've got your context now. 1 and 2 is your context, the first 2 Dune movies. He's done the job now to say, now he can go full out and say, this is how
I think that he
finish.
very clearly, I don't think that he has any intention to just throw the
No, he loves the source material too much.
He likes the source material too much. And I think he understands the thing about adaptation is that, yes, you need to be able to make your own changes. But also, if you change too much of it or you change really core things about something, it stops being an adaptation and it just kind of becomes fan
fiction.
So I'm very interested to see what he does. That being said, that's about all the time we have to talk about.
I feel like we barely talked about Blade Runner.
Which is, I go back and forth on it sometimes because it's like nominally this is a Blade Runner episode, right? But I had fun talking about the other stuff that we talked about.
And how much can you say about, you said this earlier, that hasn't been said,
It's like
right?
I said.
It's a great movie. How much you connect to that movie is up to you and what you're coming at it from.
I always try to say that the way that I've done these episodes so far is that I don't really think of them as an episode about the movie. I think of them as an episode about the specific screening experience that we had. And we talked about that, I think, amply.
Sufficiently? Yeah.
And, we also talked about like eating out of Slimer's ass. So like, I think that like we've touched on.
We didn't, you did.
I did, you're right.
Yes.
You don't swear. That's, I want to end it on the same discussion question that I always ask on. Please don't break the podcast.
No, I won't. Don't worry.
But what obscure, never going to happen screening that if we see is playing somewhere, we have to drop everything and decide oh my God, we got to do an episode on this.
I must say, this is the age of re-releases we're living in right now because, like I said, A24 is bringing back all these movies. With the Mad Max prequel coming out, I'm very excited to watch Fury Road again. I'm like super confident that's going to come back. Tenet coming back was super exciting.
Yeah, I missed Tenet.
That is like one of my favorite movies ever, and seeing it in 70 millimeter IMAX was next level. So the one movie I always want to see, I've actually kind of prepared an answer. Not really, but I quickly looked through like the greatest sci-fi movies of all time and picked one that I want to see. Yeah. The David Bowie movie. I would like to see that one.
The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Man Who Fell from Earth.
That's a great one. I would love to talk about.
Have you seen that movie?
I've never seen Man Who Fell to Earth. Have you?
Nope.
Perfect.
That's why I
actually
picked it.
always prefer when
and
someone
that's not going
like,
to pop up tomorrow.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not impossible that it might play. It's not like
no, it's not impossible. That's why I picked it.
You know,
I have to give myself a chance. I gotta.
Very well thought out. You come prepared, just as always.
I strategize this.
It's one of the things I love about you.
You can get enough of me, but not too much.
I want to thank Lily Steinberg for helping to produce the show and managing social media. I want to thank Kristen Eng for our logo artwork. Aside from that, this has been Bad First Impression. You can find the show on all socials at BFI Pod. Please help the show by rating, reviewing, and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this episode the night before on YouTube, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the little bell up in the corner so that you get notifications whenever we make new posts. If you have any questions, suggestions, or thoughts, you can DM us on social media or feel free to reach out to us at mailbag@bfipod.com. And as always, I've been your host, Devin Warner. You can find me on social media at WhatIfDevin. And until next time, what do we want to go out on?
It's not my show.
I know, but like I always like guest input on how I go out on. I like to throw to the guest and see where they go with it. It can be related to the movie. It can be related to the discussion topics that we've had.
I want to get the car that Ryan Gosling drives.
You want to get the car that Ryan, as always. And by the way, before we
even though I don't drive, I want that car.
I do. Do you not know how to drive?
I didn't say that. I said I don't drive. I don't know how to ride a bike. I know how to drive.
I do want to. I know that we're past the intro, but I want to call attention to it before we leave. You are the first guest to see me take my shoes off because I wear large work boots, and I kick my guests when I wear them in the studio. So I take them off before I record. You were the first guest to see me do that and say, well, I'm taking my shoes off too.
Man, I asked the producer, what do you want me to do? I asked you, what do you want me to do? This is not my house. This is a basement. It's not up to me. So whatever y'all tell me to do, I do. I'm here with you, my friend, in solidarity.
Well, on that note, until next time, this has been Bad First Impression, and we would like the car that Ryan Gosling has in the film.
Let's make it a popcorn bucket.
Let's make a popcorn bucket out of the car and find a way to fuck it. All right. Bye, y'all.